In natural ability and discrimination, Emperor Ju was acute and quick. His hearing and sight were extremely sensitive, and his physical skills and strength surpassed other men. His hands could slay a fierce animal. His knowledge was sufficient to ward off criticism. His verbal skills were sufficient to adorn his errors. He boasted to his ministers about his own ability. He was haughty to all the realm with his reputation, and he believed that all were below him. He loved wine, debauched himself in music, and was enamored of his consorts. He loved Taji and followed her words. Thus he had Xizhuan create new licentious sounds, the Paley dance of licentious women, and the lewd music of fluttering down. He made the taxes heavier in order to fill the deer tower with coins, and stuffed the Chujiao storehouses with grain. He increased his collection of dogs, horses, and unusual objects, overflowing the palace buildings. He expanded the Shajiu garden tower, and had a multitude of wild animals and flying birds brought there. He was disrespectful to ghosts and spirits. He assembled numerous musicians and actors at the Shajiu garden. He made a lake of wine and a forest of hanging meat, and had naked men and women pursue each other in them, conducting a drinking feast throughout the night. 100 surnames looked toward him with hatred, and some of the feudal lords revolted. Hey folks, I'm Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board. And today I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about a very classic Eastern story archetype, that of the corrupted emperor, and how we have actually seen it a great deal in Western fiction. Not because of, as some might say, cultural appropriation, or some attempt to subvert this culture and demonize it, but rather because there are many elements of culture that are universal and speak to us universally. And one of these aspects is Ming the Merciless. Or, as you just heard almost perfectly described, the Emperor Ju of the early Hsia dynasty. This is an excerpt from Ralph D. Sawyer's translation of The Art of War, specifically the foreword. It's not a part of The Art of War, but Sawyer takes a great deal of time to discuss the historical and cultural context in which this work was written, which is very fascinating. I keep this rather than a smaller, thinner copy of The Art of War, because as those of you who have read it know, it's actually not that long. But this is really nice for its insight into the historical context, the growth of warfare and weaponry as it went along with the evolving tactics and all these other things. But something that has always stood out to me was the passage I just read, which is actually extracted not from The Art of War, but from a recounting of the various dynasties of China's history. And I read it, and I immediately thought of Ming the Merciless, as portrayed in the classic Flash Gordon film. You know, one with the Queen soundtrack. I believe it was made in '84. A really great film that has been chided for its portrayal of its primary antagonist. This has been called the Yellow Scare, or cultural appropriation is more likely now. None of these things are true. None of these things are fair criticisms. Ming the Merciless admittedly is a Chinese-themed villain, but he behaves like a villain from these Chinese dynastic sagas. He's corrupt. He's out of touch with his feudal lords. He indulges far too much in pleasure, but he is also incredibly formidable. He is intelligent. He is well-spoken. He is physically above those around him. He is strong. And it is these things that make him such an imposing presence on the screen. Now, this movie has a lot of things going for it beyond the betrayal of Ming the Merciless. Admittedly, Max von Sydow's portrayal of Ming the Merciless is really, really good. However, there's also the soundtrack and all these other things that make the movie very enjoyable. There's a very weird aesthetic to it. I remember being very enamored of the aesthetic when I watched it. When I think I was 12 when I first saw this movie, and I watched it several times after that, just because I enjoyed the look of everything. However, Sydow's portrayal of Ming is spot on. He is arrogant. He is licentious. He is so self-absorbed that he really embodies this kind of Emperor Jew mentality, his attitude, the way he just throws away his minions, his subordinates, and ultimately his kingdom. And I think that that's really great. Rather than condemning this or criticizing it, we should really celebrate that Hollywood was able to bridge a cultural gap with his character, and not just with the character, but with the way the story unfolded. So there are a series of characteristics given for commanders in Sun Tzu's Art of War, and the positives and negatives are both addressed. The positives are as follows: wisdom, knowledge, credibility, strictness, benevolence, courage, being a skillful analyst, being unconcerned by fame, unconcerned by punishment, putting the army or the nation first, tranquility, obscurity, uprightness, self-discipline, being a strong commander, which is not physical strength, but ability as a commander, ability to put together strategies and so forth, cleverness or inventiveness, and all-encompassing talent, which basically just means being a Renaissance man, having some knowledge of everything. The weaknesses are being unenlightened, brutalizing and fearing the masses, not being strict, specifically not with the masses, but more with your subordinates, letting them get away with stuff you know they shouldn't get away with. Loving the people, and this is contrasted to benevolence, and that may sound odd when contrasted with fearing the masses, but there's a nuance to it. Essentially, another one is being obsessed with achieving fame for the sake of purity. There is a belief that having love and adulation from the people makes you a good and worthy ruler, or commander in this case, which undercuts actually the worthiness of the commander or the ruler in the eyes of Eastern philosophy most of the time. Being unable to fathom the enemy. This is in contrast to being a skillful analyst. It means not being able to understand the goals, the motivations, and the actions of an enemy. And this applies specifically to combat, but it can also be seen in the broader sense of not understanding what other people are attempting to accomplish. Being easily angered, hasty to act, arrogant, weak, and a poor commander. In other words, not putting together good strategies, not responding to problems that you need to respond to as a commander, whether they be issues with discipline and the management of your troops, or whether they be changes in circumstance or the actions of the enemy. And what's interesting is, again, we see all of these things play out in the Flash Gordon film. Because Flash Gordon has many of the qualities of a good commander, and while Ming has a few of the qualities of a good commander, he is a skillful analyst, for example, and he has many talents, he does not have a majority of them, I would say, and he certainly has all of the weaknesses of a commander. And this shows us something very important as we watch the story play out, because Ming is very, the title Merciless is very appropriate to him. He is brutal to his own troops. He is very hard with Flash Gordon when he appears. He steals away the girl. He tries to have Flash executed. He doesn't succeed in that, but he deals out a punishment that seems very out of proportion to Flash's unassuming crime of getting caught up on a rocket ship that he really had little intention of being on. And all of these actions that Ming takes are sowing the seeds of his downfall. He is galvanizing Flash against him, whereas he may have been able to win him over at the very beginning if he had, understood Flash a little bit better. He did not understand his enemy's motivations or his goals at all when they came face to face. Ming tipped his hand far too early and galvanized Flash against him by broadcasting his intentions to the Earth in general, He was concerned with that fame and recognition from the people of Earth, so that undermines him. He is certainly not obscure or an unknown, whereas Flash is. All of these things point to a gradual build up to the point where things will tip in Flash's favor, just because Ming has so undercut himself through his actions. Even though he is very intelligent, he is very powerful, he wields immense armies. All of the things that Ming does over the course of the story undercut him and make it impossible for him to wield those advantages against Flash. And there is a reason that plays so strongly. And it's not just the idea that the villain must be all-powerful and the hero must start out weak and build up to a position of strength. Yes, that is true. That is a great part of storytelling. But specifically for a character like Ming or a character like the Emperor Zhu, you have to show the moral collapse of the character. He is so capable, so powerful, so intelligent that he should not be beatable, save for his moral failings. This is important. There is an idea in Eastern governance called the mandate of heaven. The rulers who rule because they are moral people. Now, that's not true, and even Asian commenters knew that. Like, if you look through the histories of rulers in China, they are almost always criticized for their corruption, for their incompetence, for their laziness. Yes, they are supposed to be concerned with the welfare of the people. They are supposed to rule wisely. They are supposed to be frugal. Some of them were. Most were not. And that is because they were human beings. But the idea, the philosophical idea, was that your rulers were mandated by heaven. And as long as they were moral rulers, they would remain your rulers. However, corrupt rulers would naturally collapse and be replaced by a more moral person. Not a more powerful person, not a more intelligent person, rather a more moral person. Because the person who behaved with a moral viewpoint, in this case with a Confucian viewpoint, to be specific, would naturally attract the loyalty of estranged retainers. He would naturally gather the power that the corrupt ruler was giving up as he pursued his pointless, licentious, or gluttonous, or self-indulgent whims. And eventually, it would just be impossible for the corrupt ruler to oppose the new, frugal, moral, virtuous ruler who would just replace him. There would be, of course, physical battles along the way, but the story would really hit the tipping point when the immoral actions of the old ruler would cut loose so much of his own power base that the virtuous ruler could then ascend and collect it and wield their fealty and begin the overthrow. And you actually see this in Flash Gordon when Flash forms a bond with the leader of the Hawkmen. And his name escapes me. I used to know the name of the actor who played him too, who's a really great scenery-chewing actor. Brian Blessed, that's who it was. Brian Blessed played this guy, huge, booming voice, hail fellow, well-met attitude. And as soon as Flash got the loyalty of Brian Blessed's character, oh man, you just knew. You knew the scales had tipped. And that was the moment that Flash was going to win. And that is also the quintessential story of the fall of the corrupt dynasty and the rise of the new virtuous dynasty, which is what people in China view as the basic structure of history. There is always a corrupt dynasty that is on the way out. There's always a virtuous dynasty that is building up to replace it. This is always the way history has been in China. And to see that history played out so perfectly in Flash Gordon is excellent. This is a point where cultures meet. And it is not an appropriation. It is not an oppression. It is a thing of beauty. It is a thing of perfection. because it shows that in spite of the cultural differences, we are the same. We understand the same basic things. We don't see history in the same cycle as China does, but we understand the moral principles that underpins that cycle that China believes exists. And on that, we have a connection that is good and is strong and should be praised and not cut down. And that's my thoughts on Ming the Merciless and pretty much every other take on the character that has come through American culture in the last 150 years. Don't view it as some kind of yellow scare. Yes, some of the authors probably meant it that way. However, just like Ming the Merciless, the virtues in their story undercuts the vices in their story and leaves us with the good and virtuous story that is left, and the immorality and the vice and the self-indulgence of that story can be allowed to drain out. That is the lesson of Ming the Merciless, and I hope it's what you take away today. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that, gave you something to think about. If you have watched the old Flash Gordon movie and you have any thoughts, or if you just have some further comments to add to the archetype of Ming the Merciless, I would love to hear them down in the comments. There's a like button and a subscribe button you can use as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.